Our first forum will tackle the recent developments in military cooperation and diplomatic relations between North Korea and Russia. On June 19th, Putin visited North Korea for the first time in 24 years and held a summit with Kim Jong-un, leaving the next day. Despite the short visit, it left profound implications for international relations surrounding the Korean Peninsula. Of particular note is the potential military intervention by Russia in the event of emergency through military alliance between North Korea and Russia. This has two implications. Russia could intervene if a war breaks out on the Korean Peninsula, and North Korea could get involved in the ongoing war in Ukraine. These issues have far-reaching implications for the security dynamics of Northeast Asia as well as Eastern Europe, where NATO and other Western countries are deeply engaged. The growing tensions between liberal democracies, which include South Korea, the US, and Japan, and authoritarian regimes, which include North Korea, China, and Russia, is becoming a global issue. In this forum, we will explore the assessments and the predictions of regional experts regarding the strengthening the North Korea-Russia relationship and the military cooperation. To help us unpack these issues, we have an esteemed panel of guests. First is Celine Pajon, a research fellow at the French Institute of International Relations and the head of Japan research. She will provide us with the European and the French perspectives on current North Korea-Russia relations. Next, we have Professor Alex Tan from the University of Canterbury in New Zealand, who will discuss the viewpoints from Oceania, Taiwan, and China. Then, Professor Seung Hyok Lee from Tohoku Gakuin University in Japan will offer insights from the Japanese perspective. Finally, we have James Crabtree, a writer and geopolitical researcher, who will share the American and British views on this critical issue. Stay with us. We delve into these fascinating topics with our distinguished guests. Thank you for joining us. If free, friends, and then we will listen to Celine Pajon's short lecture on the North Korea and then Russia relations from European and French perspective. Please.
Excellent. Thank you so much, dear Dr. Peik, for your invitation. So very happy to be here and to comment on the North Korea-Russian recent rapprochement. I think this is very unprecedented and very worrying for European and for French and for the whole international community. So I would like to provide some kind of element to see how we can interpret this strengthening of the relation. I think first that this is a kind of result that we've seen recently with the visit of Vladimir Putin to North Korea. This is a result of a gradual rapprochement that we've seen in the past 10 years or so, and this is the result of the diplomatic isolation of both North Korea and Russia. Russia, of course, after the invasion to Ukraine, have been pushed into a corner and have been sanctioned by the international community. North Korea is in the same kind of position for some times now. So rather than, I think, maybe their objective to demonstrate that they are not so isolated and they can find some supports and friends, this recent summit actually demonstrates their weakness in a way, and their deep isolation, and the fact that they are in need of having more partners, But when you look at the respective situation of both North Korea and Russia as two authoritarian states, which economic situation is very in a dire situation, very weak, and which are clearly in breach of human rights in both countries, and also violating international law, international regimes, such as the non-proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. And of course, with the Russian aggression to Ukraine, denying other countries' integrity and sovereignty. I think this is a very worrying trend, and also a fact that two failed states, in a way, two very weak powers can band together to oppose the rules-based order, and to also oppose the broader Western world, I would say, is sending a very negative signals, and is very destabilizing, and which is exemplified by this rapprochement, is the interconnectedness between the European and Asian theater. We've seen that for several times now. I mean, we know that China is supporting Russia war efforts in Ukraine by providing some economic support and also some dual-use equipment. We know that South Korea is a very important provider of military equipment to Poland, so in a way is also contributing to the dynamic of the Ukraine conflict. So we were already realizing that there is some intermingling relation and interconnection between the two theaters, but now with the clear rapprochement between the North Korea and Russia, it adds another layer of this, and it's clearly demonstrate that we need to really have a broader holistic look at what is going on in the two regions of the world, and that the European needs to have a more also interest and maybe more commitment to what's going on in Asia and East Asia. And as the Asian players are also being more and more committed on what's going on in Europe. So I think this is one of the key message that we can get from the latest development between DPRK and Russia. This is posing a lot of questions also in terms of how to be able to better enforce the sanctions, the international sanctions vis-à-vis the two players, because obviously they are supporting each other to try to go around this sanction or circumvent these sanctions. So I think it also calls for a greater collaboration between European countries and their Asian partners in trying to design a better way to enforce the sanction, and to make sure that they are actually kind of efficient. I think what we see also is the fact that NATO will have certainly more interest and more discussions about the East Asian theater. For several years now, we've seen that China has been on the agenda of NATO meetings for good reasons, and we've seen also concomitantly the rapprochement and more cooperation between NATO and the AP4, so the four partners in Asia, in which you have South Korea, Japan, as well as Australia and New Zealand. And I think this latest visit by Vladimir Putin and this treaty between North Korea and Russia is also adding another element of alarm, I would say, of concern about what the situation, how the situation in East Asia is evolving, and how this specific relation has an impact directly on the European theater. So I think there is an upcoming NATO summit in Washington. I believe the AP4 countries will be invited, and of course I think this rapprochement will be discussed thoroughly within the NATO partners. Footnote on that to say that, for example, France is not so keen on seeing NATO turning more into East Asia or going to East Asia. There have been a lot of discussion and a lot of confusion actually in France regarding what would entail greater rapprochement between NATO and Asian partners. I think in France there is a support for greater cooperation in some cases in cyber security, space issue, which are not geographically defined. But there is traditionally a kind of reluctance to see NATO enlarging its security interest and concern and going to another theater, beyond the transatlantic region. So we've seen some reluctance in that, and that might not be only the case of France. I think maybe within NATO there are still some discussion between the allies regarding to what extent NATO can give interest and can go and act more in Asia and try to mitigate the instability that we see in Asia, that has also some consequences on the European theater. So I would like just to add this note regarding the French position. Also, you know that France has its very own Indo-Pacific strategy. So this is explain why also there have been a lot of concern in France looking at the Russia-North Korea rapprochement. I think it's only reinforcing actually the political willingness in France to be more present and to act in the region in support to international rules-based order. That's already what we are doing. France has been navigating, patrolling the South China Sea for more than 10 years now to enforce the law of the sea and to defend the freedom of navigation. We also are a P5 power, so as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, we consider that we have a specific responsibility to make the international regime, such as a non-proliferation regime, be respected. So in this light,
All right, thank you. Thank you so much for your excellent, presentation and then brief. And you actually gave us some ideas on, French perspectives too, yeah, in it. So yeah, and then I have, a few, questions, for you. I think it's we discussed, before this, your presentation, and then talked about French, current French political situation. And then many actually think and are concerned about national rallies, presumed the victory in this parliamentary election. And then if it is turned out to be true, and then national rally, and then into the far left party, not just France, but also Italy, and then the Netherlands, and there might be Germany. What will happen to those major European countries' relation with Russia, and then Ukraine-Russia war?
Yeah, that is very important question right now. And as you know, there have been a big important upsurge of the far right in France with the general elections, the snap elections that were called by the President Macron. And so we know that traditionally our far rights, and maybe it would be the same for other countries in Europe, as kind of advocated for closer ties with Russia. They have quite cordial relation with Putin's Russia, which is quite concerning, because we imagine that if they are going to actually get the majority, absolute majority in our assembly, and that Jordan Bardella, which is the leader of the National Rally, become prime minister, he will tend to have a more cordial, more warming ties vis-à-vis Putin, and maybe put a kind of a break or discourage the kind of assistance that we can provide to Ukraine. But this is, I think, only one scenario. What we've seen recently is that actually the National Rally right now is trying its best to go into the power and maybe to keep the power. And they have in mind not only the general election right now, but the next presidential election. And to do that, they will have to be more pragmatic than ideologist, actually. And as you may know, the priority right now, it's really put on domestic issues, economic, social, and so on. So foreign policy won't be the number one priority of any government or the National Rally. So I think they will be more trying to be more opportunistic and to be less trying to be less provocative, at least on this side. So I think that we should be a little bit more less maybe pessimistic about the implication of the coming into power of National Rally on French policy, foreign policy first, and French policy vis-à-vis Russia. Certainly, it's not a very positive signal, but I think that what we are more likely to see is continuity rather than big change first, and maybe less proactive foreign policy, because we will be in a kind of wait and see attitude rather than the big breakthrough.
Let's be hypothetical, and then this National Rally win the election, and then the far right, the government in the Netherlands, and then growing power in the the Germany of the AFD, I think I remember, and then Donald Trump, and this become more transactional. Those major powers in the United States and then Western European countries say that's the NATO. NATO's major countries, they are becoming transactional. Then what's going to make an impact on this, Ukraine-Russian war, and then Russia-North Korea relationship?
Positive, but I think that despite that we see some populists going into power in several countries and having this more transactional policy, we still have some institutions that are holding the all values and principles together. Fortunately, if you look at the result of the European Parliament elections, of course, we see that some extreme right have gained some seats, but overall, the broad equilibrium, the broad balance of power has not shifted so much. So I think we need to hold on to that and hope that there is enough positive dynamics to continue to uphold a rules-based order, because at the end of the day, more instability will be detrimental to everybody. So that's why I think there may be more pragmatic approach will be at the end of the day will be prevailing, I hope.
Then you mentioned during your lecture on NATO AP4, and then France is not very proactive on this developing this relationship. But NATO summit is going to happen next week in Washington D.C. Many people are actually watching this very important political and security events right now, and then those NATO AP4 meetings. Actually, do you see any North Korea Russia rapprochement become a major issue for that this NATO AP4 meeting or summit?
Yeah, of course, I think it will be one of the major issue, because it directly impacts the transatlantic theater and the European theater. And I think we have a lot to do with I mean the NATO allies and partners have a lot to exchange with the AP4 countries to better understand the situation in North Korea, to better understand the calculus that Kim Jong-un might have behind this rapprochement and this treaty with Putin. And I think what is quite remarkable is the security cooperation dimension of this treaty. There is a mutual assistance clause. So in case of an attack, of a war, Russia and DPRK pledged to come to assist each other. So this has a direct impact also on Europe. Even if right now there is a lot of caveats, we don't know exactly how each of the terms of this treaty will be defined. So to what extent this kind of clause will be activated, and how the assistance will be provided. But it's only providing more instability because of that, and providing more like kind of security dilemma, because there's a lot of opacity, a lot of uncertainty. So this explains why I think it should be at least at the middle of the center of the discussion between NATO and AP4 to better understand the situation and better analyze.
It's really, we discussed it before, but this is really, the regional security convergence, whether, the major countries like it or not, say Euro-Atlantic region and the Indo-Pacific region. I mean, the North Korea and the Russia relationship, rapprochement, and then South Korea and then Central and Eastern European countries, military, and then the defense industrial cooperation, and France Indo-Pacific strategy, and all those things actually are coming together. And then this North Korea and Russia rapprochement and the military cooperation and then treaty, it's become a real catalyst, for moving forward. The last question is, you are the, Japan expert. You are covering, Japan and the Indo-Pacific, and then especially these days, South Pacific, region too. South Pacific is a little bit far away from, this, Northeast Asia, East Asia right now. And then, but, what about your take on, Japan's perspective or reaction to North Korea and then Russia rapprochement and then military treaty?
Yeah, I think, of course, Japan with South Korea is at the forefront of both North Korea and Russia. We've seen a lot of tensions recently with the war in Ukraine. Japan also completely changed his relations with Russia. There have been a clear rupture. I mean, under the Abe, during the Abe mandate, there have been a kind of attempt to reach out to Putin and maybe solve the territorial dispute and trying to get a peace treaty with Russia. And now this is completely forgotten, and Russia is seen as inimical countries. So for Japan, it's really also further complicating the security context in the region, and I think it's also pushing in a way and encouraging Japan to get closer to South Korea and also the US, and what we've seen since last year with a very remarkable rapprochement between the three countries. That with the Camp David summit, the fact that there is now important realization that the security cooperation needs to be stepped up, expand, and deepen in a way. I think it's only nurturing this kind of logic, and especially because altogether, Russia and I mean, the rapprochement with Russia can also embolden North Korea to be more provocative, more aggressive vis-à-vis both South Korea, and we've seen in recent months several attempts to destabilize the situation. And also could be of course of detriment to Japan too, which is really can be reachable from all the kind of missiles that North Korea has in this position and can use very regularly. So I think the more coordination between North Korea and Russia can be very, very threatening to Japan too. Thank you very much.
Great pleasure, to have you in this program, and then we are looking forward to having more, conversation like this in coming months and years. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, William.
Okay. I'll introduce, Professor, the Alex Tan, from the University of Canterbury, and he's the expert on the East Asian affairs, and then, from the comparative and then international perspective. And then we will listen to his lecture on the, his take on, the North Korea and then and Russia rapprochement, and then especially from the Taiwanese and the, Chinese perspective, and then plus, Oceania. Thank you, please.
Yep. All right. Thank you again, Wu Yil, for the invitation to be able to share my views with regards to the recent events that's happening in the Korean Peninsula, the North Korea and Russia arms cooperation, and specifically the Mutual Defense Pact. I want to share a little bit on my view about this issue. My feeling is, my opinion is that the strengthening of this relationship actually is very, very concerning. Not only for the Northeast Asia region, but I would say there are flow-on effects that goes all the way to Southeast Asia, that goes all the way to Oceania. Of course, there are differential perceptions with regards to the risk and the threat. But let me explain this a little bit in my presentation today. The top concern to me is the expansive military relationship that can strengthen North Korea's military. And as we know, this is a defense pact that is being signed essentially now by two rogue states and two pariah states, okay, Russia and North Korea. The North Korean regime is, in my view, an agent of chaos. And now the relationship with Russia has just essentially multiplied, with another agent of chaos as well. So you have two agents of chaos coming together. This is exponential, in my view, as far as its ability to disrupt. These two rogue states, in my view, and why I'm saying that this is an exponential issue with regards to disruption, possible disruption anyway, is because these two states have very little to lose. Okay? They are not as engaged in a way in the international economic, global economic system, so to speak, and they have a lesser stake in this current international system that we have benefited from. So the relationship, to me, has the potential to be a great disruptor for the Asia-Pacific region and can raise, in my view, the likelihood of conflict, certainly in the immediate neighborhood of Northeast Asia, but it can go further than that, okay, because there are flow-on effects with regards to that. So my view is that when you think of how this impact, and let me explain a little bit what I meant by the possibility of the problems I see in this expansive relationship and the flow-on effect of this. If you look at the impact of this, in my view, the Mutual Defense Pact between Russia and North Korea is worrisome and potentially destabilizing in our region, because our region right now, in my view, is just balanced at the needle point. Okay? Very, very prickly balance, very careful balance right now. If you see what's happening in the region with the intensification of the United States-China strategic competition, what's happening in the South China Sea with China and the Philippines right now, what's happening around the Taiwan Strait, we are really in a needle point balance, so to speak. The implications and impact of this Russian-North Korean pact on the greater Asia-Pacific, in my view, varies by the geostrategic location of these countries in the region, the maritime nature of Asia-Pacific's geography, and the proximity to North Korea and Russia affect the threat and risk perception of the different countries that make up the Asia-Pacific. So if you think of this first factor, geographical proximity. So the closer a country is to North Korea and Russia, the higher the threat and risk perception they can feel from this defense pact. So, and then the second factor that I'm trying to propose here is the idea of what kind of territory do these countries have? So on territorial geography, continental states, contiguous states are more likely to perceive a higher threat and risk level posed by the Russia-North Korea Defense Pact than the maritime, archipelagic, or littoral states of the Asia Pacific. Of course, there are exceptions, but in general, these two factors, in my view, can help us understand the variation in how the different countries in the region view this defense pact. The most obvious threat, for example, is to South Korea, of course, right? And if you look at those two factors that I just mentioned, proximity, South Korea is closest to both Russia and North Korea. It's a contiguous state, right? So it's connected. So therefore, the level of risk from the South Korean perspective will necessarily be higher. China, in my view, must also be quite irritated by this defense pact, as it has more to lose globally than the two pariah states of Russia and North Korea. So North Korea, if we think of back in the Cold War days, seems to be going back to its Cold War arbitrage games, right? Of likely playing China versus Russia against each other to gain the maximum benefit that it can have for itself. So while the world seems to say that, this must be, it must be good for China, because these are the three states that want to change. I've seen some news report that says that these are states that wanted to change the international order. I'm not necessarily in agreement with that, because in my view, China has more to lose, with a great disruption of the international system, so to speak, because China's growth and development in the last 30, 40 years definitely benefited from the international system. But these other two, not necessarily so. So, in my opinion, China will have an elevated threat and risk perception from this defense pact. If you think again of my two factors, closeness and connectedness, right? So, continental state and closeness. So, this, in my view, is contrary to the general opinion that the pact ties countries that are wanting to change the international system and order, as some observers are claiming. It is important to emphasize that China has more to lose than these other two rogue states, in my view. Japan will have a heightened sense of threat and risk due to the proximity from both North Korea and Russia. Okay, Taiwan, based on the above two factors of geography and proximity, will have a slightly lower threat and risk perception because it's slightly farther when compared to Japan, for example. But and I don't think Taiwan and is a natural, quote unquote, a natural adversary of North Korea or a natural adversary of Russia itself. But I think the true impact of the Russia-North Korea defense pact on Taiwan is not the direct threat that these two countries can pose on Taiwan itself. Okay. Instead, my view is that the problem for Taiwan is that the potential of pulling away the world's attention on the Taiwan problem. So, because if you notice that since COVID time, the pandemic heightened the concern for supply chain security. Okay, so in a way, Taiwan got all the attention in the world, and all of a sudden, Chinese airplanes and Chinese naval ships going around Taiwan. Since 2020, the reporting became more obvious. But in all honesty, the airplanes have been flying around Taiwan since 2016. But it's 2020 that made it kind of like highlighted the whole issue. But now, with the Russia and North Korea defense pact, the attention seems to shift away from the Taiwan issue. Kind of bad news for Taiwan, because the Chinese ships and the Chinese military is still quite active. But if you would notice, there is lesser attention on the Taiwan news these days. In fact, recently, the Chinese Coast Guard has been giving Taiwanese fishermen problem in Kinmen. And yet, you do not hear the world talking a lot about it. Because now we have a new problem. The world is a new problem. And this is a big, big problem because the North Korea, Russia defense pact goes beyond our region. It has impact on the Ukraine war in Europe, right? So very interesting thing that is happening. In the Oceania region where I am, direct threat and risk perception, in my view, is relatively lower due to the distance and the geographic nature of the region. Okay, Oceania do not see Russia and North Korea as direct threat as such to its security, but the threats are more indirect, okay, in the form of being a threat to the larger region that can impact on Oceania's a sense of peace, security, and stability. And of course, if any disruption of that peace, security, and stability in the Northeast Asia region, in the Southeast Asia region, the flow-on effect to us is that it threatens our economic security as such. Okay, so I would say that I propose in my this very, very short lecture is that it is important for us to understand that, firstly, not to forget that the implication of this great disruption, a possible great disruptor, not only to the immediate region of Northeast Asia, but Southeast Asia and to Oceania. But the level of threat and the level of risk that is viewed varies from how close you are to North Korea and Russia, and what kind of state you are actually in. So that is my way of thinking about it. But we have to be very, very careful how this plays on forward, especially just a quick note on what is happening in the United States, particularly come first Tuesday of November, right? It could intensify that disruption, in my view. So it's kind of like a X1 times X2 coming together, and it could just implode. So we have to be very, very careful, something that we have to watch on and hold vigilantly if we are to ensure peace, security, and stability in the Asia Pacific.
Okay. Thank you so much for your great short but very meaningful lecture. And I have a few questions on this, and then you discuss about the possible great disruption, and at the same time based upon the closeness and then connectedness in the especially East Asian countries, and then China is really big factor for everything. China's is irritated by this Russia and North Korea Russia rapprochement, and the military so-called the nuclear treaty, we can say. And China will move and then react will something and then to this the change of security structure in East Asia, in the Indo-Pacific, and then which you just said related to intertwined with Euro-Atlantic region, especially in Ukraine-Russia war. So what will be the China's next to move for this particular, or no move?
Yeah, I think, honestly, I think China is being pushed now to have a move. Because at the moment, when China is not really, quote unquote, hands off on the Ukraine issue, supporting Russia, but this action that North Korea and Putin did is quite disconcerting for China, because now China is a bit trapped, in my view. It is trapped because if you think of the two choices that China can make, as you were talking about, to move or not to move, right? No move is bad news. because they will, in effect, these two countries will start dragging China.
Mm.
You know, I read in BBC when Putin visited Beijing that the BBC titled it as "This is no longer an equal relationship," right? That China is much stronger than Russia. Well, now that North Korea and Putin just got together, essentially there is a potential that the tail can wag the dog.
Yeah, it's more leverage, right?
It's much more leverage, and because and remember I mentioned Russia and North Korea has lesser to lose. China has more to lose, right? So the next move really is on China, but China, in my view, put itself in a trap, right? It dug a hole to itself because it did not say anything when the beginning of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So right now, what can it do? You know, it's so in my view, it is a flow-on effect. I think China never calculated that this will happen.
Okay, I agree.
This is a variable that was this error term in their equation that was unpredictable, and they did not model it. So now that it came in, they're kind of like, what do we do? Damn if you do, damn if you don't, kind of like that.
So I mean, this is a, you know, I you know, mostly agree with, you know, what you are saying, and then, you know, China is in the trap, very difficult position, and then I don't think, you know, China would expect, you know, these two country, say law country and pariah country, you know, certain regimes, you know, to collaborate at this level, you know.
Yes.
And Russian-Ukraine war happened, and then Russia need weapons, and then North Korea actually provide the weapons, and then, oh, you know, it's pretty good, you know, Russia, probably one-shot game, you know, let's get the, you know, weapons, and then we'll forget about North Korea. But I think it's Russia is trying to, you know, is getting, you know, getting to know that, oh, the North Korea is pretty useful, you know, for the leverage over the United States and North Korea, South Korea, and then Japan at the same time, oh, over China.
Yes. Well,
So
so
this,
in a way, Uyil, I totally agree with you on that point. This is a way that Russia can poke on the Indo-Pacific side, right? So it's a way to create, as I said, disruption in the Indo-Pacific side. And the flow-on effect is to me quite worrisome because it is we are at a situation right now wherein countries in the Indo-Pacific are also concerned about what's happening in the United States. They're concerned of the hegemon's attention in the region, which is, you know, as we will know, it has been quite in and out, in and out. The attention sometimes is in, sometimes is out, you know. And as a result, Japan and South Korea, these middle powers, have been extending a lot of its, in other words, I would say burden sharing, burden shifting, what have you, you know, getting involved in the maintenance of the rules-based international system in our region. So South Korea recently has also published its Indo-Pacific strategy, and certainly starting to get more involved in the South China Sea issue as well, or at least to maintain Coast Guard presence and what have you, military exercises and what have you. Japan is the same thing. But now, with Russia and North Korea signing this pact together, which is an upgrade from whatever they had before, means my fear is that does that mean that South Korea and Japan kind of step back a little bit from the quote unquote burden shifting that they've been doing in the region to maintain Indo-Pacific regional international order, right?
okay.
So because now they have to concentrate on what's happening back home and the threat immediately back home, right? So that's the danger. So when there is no Russia-North Korea pact, South Korea and Japan can confidently move further. You know, help out Philippines, maybe help out South China Sea, help out the United States' role in keeping up the peace.
Right.
You know, collaborating with Australia, collaborating with with India, but this brings back the attention of South Korea and Japan back to their homeland.
Sure, sure. Yeah, and we are expecting to see, NATO AP4 meeting next week in the Washington, D.C. But I think it's going to be pretty interesting, event, for evaluating what we are just, discussing on this issue. And then my, last question, is a nuclear engine. And then, Russia and North Korea, this, defense, treaty actually covers strategic issues. Strategic issues translated into those, sharing, nuclear, armament and, delivery system, and then meaning that, North Korea nuclearization is officially endorsed by, Russia Federation. And then Putin, what's your take?
They don't want to be dragged into a nuclear war if, just because then it forces the Americans to play that game of, well, should we provide a nuclear guarantee, right, to all of the countries and their allies in the region, right? So for proliferating nuclear weapons in the region, whether South Korea moves to that next step is an issue that the Korean people and the Korean government would have to deliberate. But I can understand why, because their fear, again, in my view, is a lot of moving parts. Number one, direct threat from North Korea, added now geometrically, exponentially exacerbated by Russia's support. And then it's not helped by the fact that the hegemon's attention is not guaranteed, right? So in a way, this is South Korea telling the world that, you know what, we'll take care of our own defense.
Yeah, well, I think this is a pretty spicy topic to discuss for the hours. And then as you say, the first part of your lecture, and then Donald Trump might coming back, and then that's going to make this situation even more spicy and more spicier right now.
I think it becomes more unpredictable.
Yeah, so unpredictable. But I think it's at the end of this year or early next year, we will see very, very different structural change. I mean, the security structure in the Indo-Pacific and Northeast Asia, which is
I think it will change.
The Euro-Atlantic region. And then we have other the presenters in this program too. And Celine Pajon, she actually concerned about far right. The growing in the French Parliament.
Europe.
Yeah, Europe. Yeah. You know much about Europe too. So this type of thing is. It's going to be pretty.
It's really it's exponential. What we're seeing, it's not these factors that we're naming right now. What's happening in the US, what's happening in Europe, it's not just adding. I don't think it is really multiplying. It's and it's a bit worrisome that way. So, and I think for our region, though, it is important that the countries, the middle powers in these countries take more, do more things, But one thing that our Asia Pacific and Indo Pacific definitely have to work on is, despite our cultural difference and geographic differences, and because of the nature of our maritime geography and what have you, we still have to really work hard at coming up with a proper security framework.
Yeah, I think it's Asia and then Oceania, especially New Zealand and Australia, South Korea, Japan, and other say liberal democracies, and even partly China too, can cooperate with each other, and then to promote this time of peace, not the provoking and then creating time of war, right now.
If we cannot create a proper framework, we should at least design guardrails. We should at minimum guardrails.
Thank you, Alex, and it's great to have you.
Thank you, Will.
And then
thank you. No, it's good.
We don't fight a bit, and then it's good. we would love to listen to your lecture on the Japan's perspective and position on this growing the cooperation, military cooperation between North Korea and Russia. And you have about 15 minutes, and then you can just give your lecture. And then if you are ready to go, and then just go, please.
Thank you very much once again for this great opportunity. So today I will talk mostly about North Korea-Russia cooperation from Japan's perspective. But before I go to Japan's perspective, I would like to touch a little bit upon how we could interpret the growing strengthening of North Korea-Russia relations from a more broader perspective. The first point I want to talk about is that we must see Russia as a major player that still has a significance and tremendous influence in the direction of Northeast Asian security environment. Because there has been a tendency in post-Cold War period, and especially in this century, to focus mainly on China, understandably, and threats originating from North Korea. And there has been some assumption of somewhat viewing Russia as something like a secondary sideline actor in Northeast Asian security dialogue and discussions. But this recent Russia-North Korea relations remind us once again that Russia is not only a major factor in Europe, but also fully capable of making its presence felt in Northeast Asian security by its own engagement. The second point is that we hear a lot about a new Cold War, so-called, that has already started in Europe as well as in Northeast Asia. And this division is, of course, between liberal democracies allied to the United States on the one hand, and China, Russia, and North Korea on the other, in case of Northeast Asia. And the recent North Korea-Russia relations illustrate that these countries on the other side, so-called, could mutually benefit from strengthening their own camp in the midst of this international level division. What I mean by that is North Korea could use this opportunity of closely aligning itself with Russia as a way to weaken international pressure and somehow making situational better for itself in terms of regional isolation that it is going through itself, especially in the midst of this current economic difficulties at home that we hear about. And so it is beneficial for North Korea to also have so-called the other options, diversified options, and mainly relying on China and just getting support from China, especially now that the North Korea-China relations is reported to be somewhat complicated in some areas. So the signing of this comprehensive strategic partnership, recent one between Russia and North Korea, could motivate North Korea to adopt more aggressive stance toward the United States and its allies, including South Korea and Japan, of course, by using this as a new leverage. Now, from Russia's perspective, strengthening its relations with North Korea, but not only with North Korea, but with other Asian states, as we see in Vietnam too, could mean that it could balance its isolation in Europe by giving an additional source of concern for US and its allies by shifting its attention outside of Ukraine. So these are the 2 points that I would like to talk about, that I'd like to mention about the broader implication of North Korea-Russian relations. Now, if I move on to the Japan's perspective and how North Korea-Russia relation is being viewed, the first and the foremost factor that I would like to emphasize is that from Japan's perspective, the biggest concern is transfer of military technologies from Russia to North Korea, especially in the area of ballistic missiles. as we all know, Japan is very vulnerable, probably the most vulnerable, along with South Korea, in terms of North Korea's missile threats. And of course, North Korea's most ICBM and satellite launch tests are done by shooting in the direction of Japan, meaning eastward or southward. And so any technology transfer that would enhance North Korean capability in missile areas is of grave concern for Japan for obvious reasons. But it's not only technologies concerning ballistic missiles, though, because Russia could provide North Korea with other technology that could be used in military areas, especially such as spy satellites and anything to do with nuclear or aviation, especially in modernizing North Korea's very old Air Force and submarine technologies. But not only submarine itself, but anything to do with an SLBM related technology that is also grave concern for Japan. And that is why Japanese news coverage and expert analysis about the recent President Putin's visit to North Korea, and also Kim Jong-un's visit to Russia's Amur region last year in September, extensively focused on this specific point of weapons or military technology transfer, the potential of that. The second is point I would like to emphasize from Japan's perspective is that, as we all know, Japan is a very important U.S. ally in the Asia Pacific, and it has actively promoted security cooperation among so-called like-minded countries against the expansion of authoritarian states' influence in the region. But mainly, this was targeted against China, as we all know. Um, but but the recent Russia North Korea uh, engagement cooperation means, therefore, it could become a counterweight to already existing U.S. Japan and U.S. South Korea alliances. In addition to these Japan initiated like-minded countries' cooperation as an additional point of concern for Japan into an already significant rivalry and the threat perception that Japan feels toward China. And In addition, Japan has been taking part in various international sanctions against North Korea, mainly the United Nations initiated sanctions for North Korea's nuclear tests and missile launches. But in addition to that, Japan also has imposed its own unilateral sanctions against North Korea for those same reasons, in addition to the abduction issue, which I will mention later a little bit. Um, and and all these participation in sanctions by Japan against North Korea is in the hope to isolate and pressure North Korea in the international community so that it would help Japan's dealing with North Korea. But if North Korea uh, cooperates further more extensively with Russia and aided by Russia, not only in military areas, but potentially in broader areas such as economic and diplomatic front as well, from Japan's point of view, it could possibly undermine Japan's efforts and Japan's position vis-a-vis North Korea because it would give in a way, a breathing space to North Korea. And the last part I would like to talk about is that regarding the war in Ukraine, Japan has been very supportive of Ukraine in the current war from the very beginning. And this is a bit different from the position of most other Asian countries, especially the ones in Southeast Asia that has, comparatively speaking, that have had traditionally long-term relations with Russia and who have more understanding toward Russian arguments. But Japan, in that regard, has been very clear from the beginning that Japan supports Ukraine as a liberal democratic camp member. And but with North Korea's help, uh, it is widely reported that it is possible that this war could further prolong by North Korea's help to Russia. And what this could possibly mean from Japan's point of view is that although it is not a direct influence, it could have long-term implication in U.S. security policy direction, especially now that we are facing the presidential election in the U.S. So depending on how the war would continue, how further it would prolong, and what kind of president would come in the U.S. and how the U.S. president would see that new situation, it could have an indirect influence in U.S.'s dealing with Japan, and that is obviously of a point of concern as well. I was asked to talk about any other topic that would be intriguing and provocative regarding Japan. And I would like to mention 2 points. The first one is in Japan, not specifically about Japan, it is common in any other country as well. There has been a strong tendency to analyze and explain anything about North Korea, including North Korea's security, any North Korean affairs, mostly from its relations with China. So all the analysis has been North Korea-China relations and how much influence China has. But this recent development between North Korea and Russia, therefore, has been somewhat of a shocking reminder that it's not only about North Korea and China that we need to analyze and research, but it's North Korea-Russian relations. It's actually very important too, and it must be regarded on equal footing, at least as significant as North Korea's relations with China. And from Japanese academia and media coverage and of course Japanese experts on North Korea have known this all along, but the more broader trend has been just focusing on China. So this new development would be a good reminder that North Korea-Russia relations need to be taken much more seriously. After all, Russia, well, the Soviet Union at the time, it's a father of the establishment of North Korea, and Russia has always been regarded highly and respected in North Korea. And finally, one point that I would like to mention before I end my talk is this one quite often overlooked aspect of Japan's relations with North Korea, that is the abduction issue. It is not an overlooked aspect in Japan, but it is in outside Japan. When we talk about Japan's relation with North Korea, it is often overlooked because it's not a direct security matter as in missile or nuclear threat. But it is, from Japan's perspective, a very, very important and one of the primary issues that the hurdle that needs to be overcome if we were to see any improvement in Japan-North Korea relations. And I will not go into exactly what this issue is, but this issue became an official issue, bilateral issue in 2002, but there has been a long deadlock in this resolution. But for interesting reasons that we are not really all clear, there have been some statements from both governments in recent month actually, that there might be possibility of a renewal of talk, and also interestingly, some of the victims who came back to Japan have started speaking out more on media about this as well. Of course, we haven't seen any result. We haven't seen any fruition of this backstage negotiation in any way. But there has been some talks as to something might be happening. So at this point, one interesting question would be, would this North Korea-Russia cooperation have in any way influenced the possibility of this backstage negotiation between Japan and North Korea? Meaning, uh, maybe if North Korean leadership sees the possibility of themselves too much getting pressure from Japan, maybe it might give less incentive in the minds of North Korean leadership to talk with Japan now that North Korea has these breathing space and additional support in the region, and North Korea could kind of could weaken its own isolation in the region at this point. Yep.
Yeah, thank you
Yes.
so much, Ishu, for your short presentation, and then it was very very informative at the same time intriguing, and then with
Thank
a lot
you.
of provocative issues to discuss. And then let me ask you a few questions from different point of view, or your own based upon, of course, based upon your lecture. And then my first and I think the most important question is, what will be Japan's next move to this Russia, Russia military cooperation at the treaty level? And then many people argue that it's it has a strategic element in it. Strategic is can be translated into nuclear dimensions. You mentioned that. And then, what other, Japan's strategic move, toward or to respond to, this type of, bilateral, development? That's my first question.
Yes, thank you for your question. It is still very much an ongoing issue. So, well, I think we need to be a little careful about what Japan's next move would be vis-a-vis North Korea and Russia. Because as I mentioned before, I think for a lot of Japanese, even for experts, it must have been very shocking that North Korea and Russia would go that far and sign a de facto almost a military alliance of comprehensive strategic partnership. So I think Japanese media coverage and the expert discussions that I have seen are mostly um, of reporting exactly what has been discussed between North Korea and Russia, and that the possibility that it would be a counterweight military alliance that would balance the U.S. dominance in the region. But further than that, exactly what Japan would do uh, in case the as I said, the weapons transfer and the specific Russian support for North Korea actually become reality. I think the Japanese government is still very much carefully discussing all these possibilities. So
Yeah.
it would be difficult for us to exactly like how they would move in case these become possibilities. But one thing about what we could say about Japan is that Japan will discuss and Japan will ally itself and align itself even closer and to toward the United States and the liberal democratic camp to counter this along with its partners and like-minded countries.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think it's you discuss about the Ukraine, Russia war front right now, and then Japan has been very, say, consistent, to support, Ukraine, against, Russia in this, war situation, and this in Russia, North Korea, rapprochement, and then, the fact that, the North Korea actually prolonged, as you just argued, this war by providing ammunition 152, 122 millimeters. At the same time, ballistic missiles, which is a very very big concern, for the military expert, for the North Korea testing its own ballistic missiles, not just ICBM, but short range and the mid range missiles in the war ground, battleground. So and Japan might have a tit for tat type of action to Ukraine Russia war situation, and then that might be connecting this the European, the security theater, and then East Asian security theater, is that's exactly what, the Zhigubenu Brzezinski's, the grand chessboard, type of, grand strategic game, started. So and then at the same time, China is playing a very important role. And then you say, Japan, toward, China, it's a US and then Japan alliance actually, and the Indo-Pacific strategy aiming at, China. But now, Japan need to think about, very, bluntly, Russia's, presence, security presence in here. And then you can see this, China, and then Russia, and then North Korea. Many people say this trilateral, say, virtual alliance, it's emerging. But say, some people argue that, China is a very difficult position by this, Russia, and North Korea, Russia, military, say, alliance, you can say. So do you think it's in that sense, China and then Japan might have some sort of, the common ground, on especially nuclear proliferation and the nuclear issue to deal with this Russia and then North Korea at the same time?
In the broadest sense, I believe that Japan and China could potentially have a common ground in limiting or pressuring North Korea not to provoke further in terms of nuclear capabilities. In terms of Northeast Asian security, China also has a stake in stable regional security environment. So, in that very, very broad sense, China and Japan would be sharing that idea regarding North Korea. But on the other hand, Japan has traditionally, in the post-Cold War period, and especially in this century, has viewed China more than anything else as the biggest potential threat in Japan's security. So even if they do have this common ground regarding North Korea, I'm not really sure how much that would lead to a further or more detailed or more stepped in security cooperation between Japan and China in that regard.
Thank you for. I mean, it's getting more complicated. I think this is a cliche for security studies, in all time. But I think it's getting more complicated in the Northeast Asia, East Asian, security theater. And my last question, before I will let you go, is what will be the impact of this, Russia and then North Korea, Russia rapprochement on, Japan, South Korea, Japan, bilateral relationship?
I think that depends on how Japan views the future of South Korea-Japan relations in security realm. What I mean by that is, as you know, at this point, both South Korea and Japan sees this new Russia-China relations and this a comprehensive strategic partnership as a threat, as a counter weight to South Korea, U.S. and South Korea, Japan relations, because at this point, Japan-South Korea relations, at least in security areas, is more cooperative than in the past. And of course, Japan would love to, I believe that Japan would like to see it kept in that way. But but a lot of these discussions regarding East Asian security in Japan, what we constantly hear from the Japanese perspective is what would happen if presidency or a certain regime change happens in South Korea, and if South Korea sort of has a shift or a change in its strategic view, then how would Japan deal with that in several years from now? So at this point, South Korea and Japan, we both share that this new development is detrimental to Northeast Asian security as strong allies to the U.S. And Japan is willing to cooperate with South Korea. But in the future, there is always at the back of some of the Japanese experts' mind is that what would happen? Would there the subtle nuance of how a new elites in South Korea in the years to come, how would they view the situation? Because in case of Japan, this position is not likely to change. As I said before, Japan has made its strategic position very clear, and it's very strongly in the side of the liberal democratic camp as ally to the U.S., and they're actually trying to strengthen it. So it's not going to change. But what would happen to Korea? That's the main question for Japanese.
Okay, thank you so much. I mean, great discussion. And then we learned a lot, and then I think it's we have a lot more, issues, to discuss in the near future. Thank you for, coming and then joining this, session with us. And then we are looking forward to cooperate, in the coming months and the coming years in this venue. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I really enjoyed the time.
Okay, thank you for having me here today. I appreciate the chance to talk to you. My name is James Crabtree. I'm a distinguished visiting fellow at the European Council on Foreign Relations in Berlin and a visiting fellow at the Asia Society in New York. Until not too long ago, I used to run the Asia office of the International Institute for Strategic Studies and helped to organize the Shangri-La Dialogue, where we would welcome the defense minister of the Republic of Korea each year and listen to their statement about Northeast Asian security and how that linked to the wider security of the Indo-Pacific. And I've been asked here to talk today a little bit about North Korea-Russia cooperation, a very timely topic. So what I want to do is look at the context of increased cooperation between the DPRK and Russia in the bigger picture of relations between Europe, the US, and China. Try and say a little bit about what I think the two sides are getting out of this cooperation, and then look at where it might go next and how the cooperation will be viewed in both the United States, but also in Europe. What we're talking about here really, I think, is a pattern of growing cooperation over recent years, but one that has been brought to public mind, in particular by the visit of Vladimir Putin to Pyongyang, as well as to Vietnam in June of this year. The two sides signed a comprehensive strategic partnership treaty, which, as the audience of a lecture like this will be well aware, echoes the mutual assistance treaty that the Soviet Union and North Korea used to have in the 1960s. In particular, the context for this has been shaped by the Ukraine war, where North Korea has been providing weapons privately to Ukraine, but also concerns about exactly what the treaty that was signed by the two sides might mean in the future. You can see a quote on the screen there, if indeed you can see the slides, from President Putin, who talked about mutual assistance in the event of aggression, something that comes very close to the kind of language you would find in an alliance. It also talks about military technical cooperation with the DPRK, which we'll come back to in a second. So this has been the prompt for concern about this, and I think it will have been noticed in the European and North American capitals. In the United States, there's a great deal of concern about a growing axis of cooperation between a quartet of nations that oppose the current global order that the US has shaped, namely Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. In Europe, these developments are seen predominantly through the lens of the war in Ukraine, which has shaped Europe's attitude to China in particular over recent years, shifting Europe from viewing China as a cooperative international power to a rival and a competitor. But it will also shape the way in which Europe looks at the security of Northeast Asia in general and the role of both the DPRK, but also the Republic of Korea. I think it's important to put this within the context of the broader geopolitics of the region. It is worth noting that relations between the US and China have improved somewhat over the last year from a very low ebb around the time that Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan in 2022 and the balloon incidents which followed. There's been a kind of tentative, very faltering mini rapprochement forged by high-level meetings between the two presidents of the respective countries, but also high-level officials. Within that, however, Chinese non-military aid to Russia has been a consistent sticking point. It's been one of the things that Washington gets most anxious about, and therefore the fact that there is more non-military but also military aid flowing between the DPRK and Russia will also be a cause of genuine concern. From the European side, as I said, Europeans have seen their entire strategic orientation shifted because of Ukraine and will view developments with the DPRK within that. I think one way of thinking about this is that Europe is grappling with the fact that nations in Asia are increasingly affecting the European security order. Now, China is the most obvious with its meaningful support for Russia, but the DPRK is another, because the war in Ukraine is so central to the future of Europe. Then any country that appears to be putting a finger on the scales is increasingly of concern. And so that will be true for the DPRK. Raja Mohan, who is a well-known Indian commentator, wrote a couple of columns about this recently in the Indian Express and in Foreign Policy, which I thought were apposite, where he talked about the fact that Asian nations are now able to make choices that shape the balance of power in Europe. In the first Cold War, it was the case that it was generally European nations who were shaping the balance of power in Asia. And now there is, at least in a small way, a sense in which it's beginning to flow the other way around. Let me talk. The second thing that I wanted to do is to talk about the motivations of the various sides for the meeting. I think from Russia's point of view, there are many different motivations that were that pushed this deal to happen. I mean, at one level, there are costs to Putin in going to North Korea, because it does underline within the international community and within the global South that Putin has this pariah status, that he's one of the very few leaders willing to meet with Kim Jong-un. That doesn't matter so much with his relationship with the West, but Russia would be concerned about how that would look in terms of its relations with other emerging market nations in the global South. But overweighing that, there are clearly much more important practical benefits, the most important being munitions, where intelligence estimates suggest that the amount of equipment that Russia is getting from North Korea is material in the course of the war. Ballistic missiles, 2.5 million rounds of ammunition, according to estimates. But the trip was also very helpful in a range of different kind of signal sending. It sent a signal to the United States that Russia, if it was pushed, could find ways to share nuclear technology, which is something that the US is very concerned about, the nuclear proliferation risks. It is, I think, a calculated rebuke to recent developments in the US ROK-Japan security relationship, which as a trilateral has been growing closer, and that's something that Russia is uncomfortable with, particularly given its historic relations with Japan. And it also sends a signal to South Korea, as this audience will be very familiar with, which has been weighing whether or not it ought to play a more active role in supporting Ukraine, particularly with weapons. And that's something that Russia would like to warn against. North Korea's motivations, I think, are slightly simpler. I mean, any international visit is good, reduces isolation, bolsters domestic legitimacy, but there are also tangible benefits in terms of potential technologies, although we're not clear the extent to which Russia will actually share technologies that it, sort of higher end technologies It also is useful in terms of the DPRK's relationship with China. It reduces to some degree some practical dependency, but also creates an incentive for Beijing to re-engage with the DPRK, given China would not want another power to have a closer relationship with Pyongyang than it does. And I suppose this is just a general point that it seems to me that the Ukraine war has been quite useful to North Korea. That opens up some strategic space, gives it an important secondary relationship with Russia to balance its relationship with China. So where does that leave the response in Europe and the United States? It's the last sort of set of things that I would like to address. I think Europe's relationship with the Republic of Korea has been historically more muted than its relationship with certain other Asian powers, particularly the other prominent democracies, Japan, Australia, increasingly India, which is the beneficiary of a lot of attention in Brussels and major European capitals. I think the visit will raise awareness of various DPRK-related risks, both in terms of the cooperation with other authoritarian powers, but also potentially the value of the EU-ROC partnership. The last major visit between Brussels and Seoul happened in 2023 when you had the 10th strategic summit between the two sides, when Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel went to Seoul. I think one of the unfortunate, or maybe more positive consequences of this visit is that European leaders will now have a sharper reason to pay attention to Northeast Asia because of concerns about how this will affect Ukraine. I think there have been other reasons why the Korean Peninsula has become more prominent of late, and the most obvious being the role of the South Korean arms industry in supporting European rearmament. Most obviously, its partnership with Poland, but also some other countries. We've seen a number of major deals, and I think that's something that most European defense decision makers simply wouldn't have been aware of before. I think European leaders will continue to ask Seoul to support Ukraine. We saw during the NATO summit that Prime Minister Yoon promised to increase non-military support. So far, South Korea has not shown any sign that it will provide weapons and has reinforced in the recent weeks the nature of its strategic relationship with Russia. But ultimately, European leaders would like to see South Korea as a balance within that conflict, given North Korea's role on the other side. I think in the United States, the concern with Ukraine is substantial, but it's also balanced with much higher profile worries about non-proliferation. Avril Haines, the director of national intelligence, testified before Congress a few months ago, talking about the fact that Russia's actions in North Korea, but also with respect to Iran and others, had the potential to undermine long-held non-proliferation norms, which is quite a significant step. So there have been warnings from the US intelligence community about what Russia may be planning to do, and that, I think, is of major concern to US decision makers. So we, at a basic level, we know what Russia is getting from the DPRK in terms of weapons. What we don't know is what Russia is going to be willing to give in return. Historically, as I have understood this, Russia was not willing to share its most advanced technology with North Korea. But the question, I suppose, is, will this time be different? Other consequences, I think this, in a useful sense, Washington may view this as a potential spur to still greater cooperation between the US, the Republic of Korea, and Japan. A relationship that has been moving ahead quite nicely from Washington's point of view. But I suppose we should say that there is, some considerable uncertainty about the direction of US Korean Peninsula policy given the election. It's not clear how a returned President Trump, who that would seem to be the most likely outcome of the election, despite President Biden's withdrawal, he had an eccentric North Korean policy or Korean Peninsula policy in many respects in his first term, and it's not clear how that would develop in his second term. So to conclude, I suppose I would say that Western powers will be watching very carefully to see if this cooperation that was embodied in Putin's visit and has been developing over recent years is going to deepen, and also to see how Seoul chooses to respond to that internationally, particularly with respect to Ukraine. In the United States, the sort of major big picture concern is that the US is facing much closer cooperation between these four rival powers. You can see the quote there by Admiral Aquilino, the outgoing head of Indo-PACOM, who talked in a recent hearing in front of the US Congress about a return to the era of an axis of evil. This is the kind of language that you do hear in Washington increasingly these days. I think more sophisticated analysis or more sophisticated analysts would understand that there are lots of divisions between this grouping. I've already discussed a couple of them with respect to China, the DPRK, and Russia, which is a very uneasy partnership. Nonetheless, that is the predominant way in which the United States is going to interpret this. I think that would be certainly true under a Trump administration, a second Trump administration, or maybe slightly less so in an administration led by a Democrat president. China would view these relationships primarily through the lens of how it affects its relationship with the US. So in a sense, they are mirror images of each other. I think there will be a focus on whether there will be more military cooperation, both bilaterally between Russia and the DPRK, as in trying to understand through intelligence work what Russia is willing to spend in terms of technologies in exchange for the weapons that it is procuring, but also whether this might lead to more trilateral military cooperation with China. This is something that Russia has proposed, but China has not yet agreed to. Generally, China has been a little bit wary of seeking to paint itself as being part of a trilateral arrangement with Russia and the DPRK, at least in public, in part because it still seeks to have a trilateral relationship with Japan and the Republic of Korea. And there was the trilateral China ROK Japan summit not too long ago. And I think ultimately Seoul's response will be watched very carefully. I mean, Seoul is striking a balance between its desire to attract international attention to the situation in the peninsula, but also to avoid being forced into a situation in which it has a rapid deterioration of its relationship with Russia. As I mentioned earlier, over the last week, you've seen a public reaffirmation of the fact that the relationship between Seoul and Moscow remains one that is strategically important. And so far, at least, Seoul hasn't signaled that it is going to be willing to support Ukraine with weapons as its European partners would like. So that's all I had to say. Thank you very much for the invitation. I mean, I think this is an important strategic development, and one that, particularly because of Putin's visit, will be watched more carefully in the months and years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for your excellent and a very comprehensive, overview and an analysis on the, North Korea, Russia, North Korea, Fukushima, last, a few months or, a couple of years already. I think it's India is another, interesting, actor in this game, and you are covering global issues. But I think it's you published a book on, India, too, and then you are India expert, I can say. And India has been, again, ambivalent on this Russia-Ukraine war. And India has been, very neutral and take advantage of whatever is, on the table for its own national security, national interest, last couple of years. But I think it's India. As far as I understand, India doesn't have the specific official, position on, in North Korea and Russia rapprochement. But as you know, Russia-India relationship is pretty special.
but at the same time, you are aware of India also, the thinking about its own reputation. And then, Russia, India has very close military relationship, and at the same time, it has a very concern about North Korea's nuclear proliferation. So it's a very mixed picture, and then variables is mixed. And then what's your take on this India's, say, presumed perspective on this in North Korea, Russia, approach?
Indian Prime Minister Modi just went to visit Vladimir Putin in Moscow in a move that was not well received in Europe, because it looked as if, as you say, India was reinforcing the centrality of its relationship with Russia. And this was the first visit that Prime Minister Modi had taken after his third election victory earlier this year. However, I don't think it's quite right to say that India is neutral in all of this. And I think India has been actively trying to forge stronger relations with not just with the United States and Europe, but also with countries like the Republic of Korea, Japan, and Australia, with the kind of democratic industrial nations of Asia that are worried about China's rise. And so and India is very concerned about closer cooperation between China and Russia. So really, India's strategic imperative on the one hand is that it doesn't want Russia to become too dependent on China, which is India's major long-term rival. Right. And it's also seeking closer relations in general terms with the West. I mean, not to the point that it will ever be a US ally in the way that the Republic of Korea is, but the direction of travel has been reasonably clear. So I think I'm not sure if India would have a strong view on, certainly not as strong as the United States or Europe, on Russia DPRK cooperation. I suppose to the extent that it complicates cooperation between Russia and China, then that may be viewed as a good thing. But as I say, mostly India's concern is about trying to strike a balance between deeper cooperation with the West on the one hand, and not having China and Russia become too close to one another if it could be avoided.
I think it's a pretty interesting and then very informative time for the informed public, not only in South Korea, but also international community who are interested in the North Korea and then reunification issue. Thank you, James.
Very good. Well, thank you for having me. That's great. It was lovely to see you again. I hope to be in Seoul before too long. So.